let's go ahead and create another file, which is going to another class, or another file program, which is going to test this class. As long as they are in the same folder, they should be able to find each other. If they're not in the same folder, you'd have to specify the path of where the class is before you can use it. But if I save it in the same folder and I try to create an object from that class, because they're in the same folder, they should be able to find each other. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and create the class that's going to test this program. So public class, I'm going to go ahead and call this SavingsAccount Test. It's the class that's going to test the savings account. And then I'll go ahead and I'll create the main method. So public static void main and all of this. Okay. Okay. So let me go ahead and make a copy of the question so we can have it in the new class as well. So paste that here like this. Okay, so in the savings account class, what we want to do, let's see. So it starts from here pretty much. All right, so I can break this down so we can see where that starts. All right, so test the class in the program that calculates the balance. Let's shift this a little bit here. Okay, so test the class in the program that calculates the balance of a savings account at the end of a period of time. It should ask the user for the annual interest rate. Okay, so we know the first thing we are doing is asking the user for the annual interest rate. So let's go ahead and do that. Since we're going to be asking the user for inputs, we are going to use one of Java's features for asking for user inputs. We have the scanner class. We can use a GOptionPane class. Let's go ahead and use the scanner class. You can go ahead and use the GOptionPane, but let's go ahead and use the scanner class, right? Just to change things around a little bit. So to use the scanner class, we have to go ahead and import it. So I'm going to import java.util.scanner. We are importing the scanner class in the java.util package. Once we have the scanner class, we have to go ahead and create a scanner object so we can use that scanner object to accept user inputs. So I'm going to create a scanner object. I'm going to call that variable that's going to reference that object scanner. I'm now creating a new scanner object in memory, passing in system.in, the system.in method, which is basically going to accept byte info from the keyboard, and I'm connecting the reference address of this object to the variable, the class type variable scanner. Now that I have the object or the variable reference in the object, I can now use it to accept user input. So I'm going to use a regular system.out.println statement to ask the user to enter the, let's see, the first thing the user is going to type is going to be the starting balance, right? It should ask the user for the annual interest rate. Okay, the first thing is going to be the annual interest rate, right? So is that it? Yeah, that's the annual interest rate. So let's ask the user that. So please enter the annual interest rate. And then we're going to allow the user to type in something. Well, first of all, we're going to use a scanner. I'm going to go ahead and call scanner.nextDouble. There's a method nextDouble in the scanner class. So when you call scanner.nextDouble, it's basically going to pop up some kind of text box, and it's going to allow the user to type in something. Now, whatever the user types is going to be converted to a double, okay, and then returned as a double. Once it's returned, we need a place to store it. So I'm going to go ahead and define a double variable that's going to hold that value. So let's see, a double. This is going to be the user's annual interest rate, or the annual interest rate that the user types. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable called user annual interest rate. The name is long. You can make it short if it's fine, if that's what you want. But I like long names. It's fine. It makes the program even clearer. So user annual interest rate. Now I have the variable. So when the user types in the double, or the value, and it's being converted, it's converted to a double and returned. I'm going to go ahead and store it in user annual interest rate, like this. So now I'll have the user annual interest rate. So let's move on. Over here it says, and the starting balance as well, right? So let's use the same idea, paste it, change the question to please enter this time the starting balance. And then once the user types in the starting balance as a double, it's going to be returned. It's going to be converted to a double and returned. Once it's returned, we need a place to store it. So I'm going to go ahead and define another double variable. Double because that starting balance can be 50 point something, so a double. And I'm going to call this starting balance in main. It doesn't matter if this variable is the same as a variable in the class. This is a different variable because it's in a different class, okay, in a different method. So they are considered two different things. All right, they don't see each other. All right, so once I have the starting balance variable, I can now use it to store the result of the starting balance that the user types. I can even call this user starting balance so we know the difference. So user starting balance, and then user starting balance is going to store what the user types what the user types as the starting balance. All right, so let's see. Also, it wants the user to type in the number of months that have passed since the account was established. Okay, since the account was established. So let's go ahead and do that. Same idea. Let's change the label to please enter the number of months. And let's go ahead and create an integer variable this time because it's going to hold the number of months, right? It's either going to be 5 or 6 or 8 or 7. So integer number of months. You can even add the user just to be clear. So user number of months, and then let's just define it now. And over here, once the user types in something, instead of converting whatever the user has typed to a double, let's convert it to an integer rather. And then once it has been converted to an integer and it's been returned, we want to go ahead and store the result in user number of month here like this. Okay, so at this point we will have everything. We'll have the annual interest rate, the starting balance, and the user number of month. All right, so let's see. A loop should then iterate once for every month, performing the following. So let's go ahead and create a loop that's going to iterate the user number of months times, right? So let's create a for loop. And the for loop is starting from month 1, right? So let's define a month. Let's say integer current month, int current month is equal to 1. Let's start from 1. We're starting from the first month. As long as the current month is less than or equal to the user number of months, then what we want to do is do what's in the loop, and before we come back up and check to see if the current month is less than or equal to the user number of month, let's add 1 to current month. So in essence, now we are starting from the first month, checking always to make sure that the current month is less than or equal to the user number of month, doing what's in the loop, and then before so basically after each iteration we add 1 to current month, and then we check to see if it's still less than or equal to the user number of month. We are iterating the user number of month times. So if the user types in 6, current month initially is going to be 1. It's going to check to see if 1 is less than or equal to 6. Yes. So it's going to do what's in the loop before it comes back up and check to see if current month is less than or equal. Before it comes back up to check if current month is less than or equal to user number of months, it sets it, or it increases it increases current month rather to 2. So now current month becomes 2. It checks to see if 2 is less than or equal to the user number of month, and so on and so forth. So in essence, we are basically iterating the user number of month times, right? So basically we have the loop setup, we have the structure setup. If you keep on reading, it says the loop should then iterate once for every month, performing the following. We have the loop, so all we have to do is perform whatever we have to perform, right? So it says A, ask the user for the amounts deposited into the accounts during the month. Okay, ask the user for the amounts deposited into the accounts during the month. So let's go ahead and use the same idea to ask the user for that. So let's paste this and say, how much? Let's say, how much did you deposit during month? Now, since current month is keeping track of the current month, we can use it. The first time is going to be 1, the second time is going to be 2, all the way to the user number of month. So since it's keeping track of that, we can go ahead and use it in this statement and say, how much did you deposit during month? And we can concatenate it with current month, like this. So it's going to, the first time is going to read, how much did you deposit during month 1? The second time is going to ask, how much did you deposit in month 2, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we know that the deposit amount is going to be a double, right? Because the user can type in 50.2. So let's go ahead and define that as a double. We'll do that in a second. But when we are converting the user's response, we don't want to convert it to an integer. We want to go ahead and convert it to a double, and then return it. When we return it, we need a place to store it. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. So I'm going to come up here and define another double and call it deposit amount. Deposit amount. And then once we have the user type in that, we're going to store deposit amount in this variable, right? Okay, so now we'll have the deposit amount, and it says that use the class method to add this amount to the account balance. So we're going to add this amount to the account balance of a particular object. Now we need that object, right? So let's go ahead and create it. So remember, we created a savings account class. So now let's go ahead and create a savings account object. And to do that, I'm going to use the name of the class, which is SavingsAccount. And then I'm going to call this account, let's say account 1. Okay. Now when I do this, it's similar to me creating something like int number. Int is the type and number is the name of the variable. You can think of this as a type, and you can think of this as the name of the variable. When you try to do this, Java is going to realize that savings account is not one of the primitive data types. It's not an int, it's not a double, it's not a character. So it's going to complain, and so it's not going to complain, but it's going to say, okay, you are not, this is not part of the primitive data types. So in that case, I think you are trying to create an object or a variable that's going to hold an object or reference an object. So it's going to look in that same folder to see if there's anything, or to see if there's a savings account class. And indeed, there's a savings account class. So it's going to say, okay, I'm going to reserve this account 1 variable for you to hold a savings account object. So that's what's going to happen. Make sure you save your class in the same folder. If you don't, you have to specify where it's saved. Otherwise, it can't find it and use it. Otherwise, this program can't find the class to use it. So savings account class, now this is reserved for an object now. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new object in memory, a new savings account object in memory, and then I'm going to return the memory address of that object to account 1. So account 1 is going to reference that object. Now when you look at the savings account class, the constructor was defined in such a way that it accepted or it accepts the starting balance, right? And then it sets the annual interest rate to 0. So since it accepts the starting balance, right? Then let's go ahead and pass in the starting balance. But the thing is, the starting balance, the user typed the starting balance somewhere here. So in that case, let's move the creation of this object a bit lower. Let's create it after the user has we've asked the user for everything here. Once we've asked the user for everything, let's go ahead and create it here. We'll have access to the starting balance, so we can go ahead and pass the starting balance in to initialize the starting balance of this particular account 1 object. Now, at this point, account 1 will have a starting balance of whatever the user typed in for the starting balance, but its interest rate will be set to 0 because the constructor sets the interest rate to 0 by default. That's why we created a constructor which says set annual interest rate, which takes a new rate and sets the annual interest rate of that particular object to the new rate. So we know that the starting balance is set, but the annual interest rate is set to 0. So let's go ahead and call the set annual interest rate instance method, or the mutator, to basically initialize the annual interest rate. So I'm going to go ahead and call account1.set, what's it called, annual interest rate. So I'm going to go ahead and copy it and paste it here. And annual interest rate, we defined it to accept a new rate. So the new rate is going to be the annual interest rate that the user typed here. Pass it here. Now we've set both the starting balance and then the user annual, and then the annual interest rate. So now we can go ahead and use that object. Everything is set for that object. Okay, so we have the deposits amount here, and the question is telling us to add this amount to the account balance. Now to add deposit amount, remember we created a deposit method over here. Where is it? Which is basically going to take an amount and then add it to the balance field of that particular object. So let's go ahead and add this deposit amount, right, to the balance field of this particular object, right? So let's go ahead and call account1.deposit, because that's what the method is called, .deposit here. And deposits, we define it to accept a new amount, and the new amount is going to be our deposit amount. This is how much we want to deposit, and then we're done. So account1.deposit, it's going to be the deposit amount. B, it says ask the user for the amount withdrawn from the account during the month. Okay, so let's go ahead and use that same idea here, and then ask the user how much did you, this time not deposit, but how much did you withdraw here during the current month, right? So this time around, we also want to go ahead and create we don't want to use a deposit amount for that. We want to go ahead and create another variable and call it withdraw amount. And when the user types in something, we want to go ahead and store the withdraw amount in that variable. And then it tells us that use a class method to subtract this amount from the account balance. We created a method called withdraw over here. That's going to accept a new value and then subtract that value from the balance. Okay, so let's do that. It's basically going to be the same as this, but this time around, This time around, we are using the withdraw method. So let's go ahead and copy this. And then we want to withdraw this time. So account1.withdraw, and we are withdrawing not the deposit amount, but the withdraw amount. Oh, the draw amount. Okay. Okay. Now let's see what it wants us to do. So it says use the class method to calculate the monthly interest rate. Right? We created a class method here called add monthly interest rate. And add monthly interest rate, let's see. So add monthly interest rate is going to calculate that and then add it to the balance, right? So let's see. Okay, so yeah, so it's going to work. Let's go ahead and call the add monthly interest rate method, because when we call it, it has all the values stored in balance. It has the right amount stored in balance. So based on the value in balance, it's going to calculate the monthly interest rate of that balance and then add it back to balance, right? So that's what we want to do, because it's a savings account, and each month it goes up, by based on a rate. So now after we've asked for the deposits and the withdrawals for that particular month, then let's go ahead and calculate. We can go ahead and call this calculate monthly interest, or we can say add monthly interest, same thing. So now let's go ahead and use this method name and then say account1 dot add monthly interest. That's it. Add monthly interest didn't accept any argument, so it's just going to be called. All right, and then let's see, it says over here, So over here it says after the last iteration, the program should display the ending balance. All right, so that's easy. That's easy. Well, it's easy, right? But we didn't go ahead. We didn't create an accessor for the balance field, right? If we want to know the balance of this particular object or this class, we need to create an accessor or a getter for this class. To be precise, for the balance field, we don't have any. We didn't create any. So remember, I mentioned if we need something, we'll come back and create it, right? So now let's create it since we need an accessor for the balance field. Let's create it. All right. So it's also going to be an instance method, just like these, right? It's going to be a public method. Return type is going to be a double. We are returning the value of the balance field. When we call this method is going to be called, let's say, get balance. When we are getting balance, then it's returning to us the balance field. So let's set the return type to a double since the balance is a double field. So public double, that's a return type. The name it's going to be, let's call it get balance. Get balance is not going to accept any argument. So I'm not going to go ahead and define any parameter. All it's going to do is it's going to return to us the balance. So we're done with the getter or the accessor. So over here where it says the program should display the balance, we can just call that. This is after the iteration here, right? So let's do that. Let's go ahead and call a system.out.println statement and say the final balance. Okay, the final balance at the end of, we have the month stored in the user number of months variable here, so we can use it. So the final balance at the end of, or let's say the final, that's fine. Let's just use the final balance. The final balance at the end of user number of months okay? So if it's 10 months, it's going to say the final balance at the end of 10 months, okay, is, and then now let's concatenate it to the balance in that particular object field. So we can say account1 is equal to account1.getBalance, since we have created the getBalance accessor here. It's going to return to us the balance of that particular field. So we can see it here like this. Now we'll have to do some formatting, and we'll do that, no problem. But for now, let's just leave it this way. Let's just solve the question, accordingly.